Some children don't cry when things get hard. They don't complain. They don't ask for help. They don't act out. Instead, they become quiet, observant, responsible, and everyone around them says the same thing. They're so mature for their age. But what if that maturity was never meant to exist? What if it wasn't growth, but survival? There's a kind of childhood that doesn't look broken from the outside. No obvious chaos, no dramatic scenes, no visible damage, just a child who behaves a little too well, a little too aware, a little too controlled, and over time, that child becomes someone who skips an entire stage of life without even realizing it. They grow up too fast. At first, it feels like a compliment. Adults trust them. Teachers rely on them. Family leans on them. They're easy. They don't cause trouble. They understand things beyond their age. And slowly, that becomes their identity. But behind that identity, there's something most people don't see. Because children aren't supposed to be easy. They're supposed to be messy, curious, emotional. And when those things disappear too early, it usually means something replaced them. Responsibility, awareness, control. Somewhere in their early life, something shifted. Maybe their parents were overwhelmed. Maybe there was tension at home. Maybe they had to take care of someone else. Maybe they learned that expressing emotions didn't lead to comfort, but to more problems. So their brain adapted. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" they started asking, "What's needed right now?" Instead of expressing their needs, they learned to manage other people's needs. And this is where the psychology begins. Because when a child grows up too fast, they don't just mature. They reorganize themselves. Their nervous system becomes wired for awareness instead of exploration. Their mind becomes focused on stability instead of curiosity. And their identity becomes built around being the strong one. But strength, in this case, isn't a choice. It's a role. One they never signed up for, but learned to play perfectly. There's a quiet scene that explains this better than anything. Picture a child sitting in a room where the atmosphere feels tense. No one is yelling, but something is off. Voices are slightly sharper. Movements are slightly faster. Silence feels heavier than usual. That child notices everything. They don't interrupt. They don't express confusion. Instead, they adjust. They become quieter, more careful, more controlled. Because their brain is trying to answer one question: how do I keep this from getting worse? And that question follows them into adulthood. Because when your childhood teaches you that stability depends on your behavior, you carry that responsibility everywhere. Into friendships, into relationships, into work. You become the one who smooths things over, the one who avoids conflict, the one who reads the room before speaking. And from the outside, it looks like emotional intelligence. But underneath, it's hyper-awareness, it's survival. People who grew up too fast often develop a deep sensitivity to others. They can sense mood shifts instantly. They pick up on subtle changes in tone. They understand what people are feeling, even when it's not said out loud. Because growing up, they had to. But here's the part that most people miss. They can understand everyone else, except themselves. Because when your focus has always been outward, you lose connection with what's happening inside. You don't ask yourself what you need. You don't check in with how you feel. You just respond, adapt, adjust. And over time, that creates a strange disconnect. You become incredibly aware of others, but feel strangely lost within yourself. There's another pattern that develops. People who grew up too fast struggle with rest. Doing nothing feels uncomfortable. Relaxing feels unproductive. Because their brain learned early on that being alert was important, that something could go wrong at any moment. So even when life becomes calm, their body doesn't fully believe it. There's always a subtle tension, a quiet readiness, as if something might shift and they need to be prepared. And this is why many of them feel exhausted, even when nothing is happening. Because they're not just living in the present, they're constantly scanning for what could go wrong next. There's also something deeply emotional that happens. When a child takes on too much responsibility too early, they often suppress their own needs. Not consciously, but gradually, because there wasn't space for them. If everyone else needed something, their needs became secondary and eventually invisible. So as adults, they struggle to identify what they want. They struggle to make decisions. They feel guilty for prioritizing themselves. Because somewhere inside, there's a belief, my needs are less important. And that belief shapes everything: their relationships, their choices, their boundaries. Or more accurately, their lack of boundaries. Because saying no feels wrong. It feels like letting someone down. It feels like risking the stability they learned to protect. So they say yes. Even when they're tired. Even when they don't want to. Even when it costs them. And over time, that creates something heavy. Resentment. But not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that builds slowly without being expressed. Because expressing it would require confronting something they've avoided their entire life. The idea that they don't always have to be the strong one. There's a powerful contradiction here. The child who grows up too fast becomes the adult everyone depends on, but also the adult who feels the least supported. They're the one people call, the one people trust, the one people rely on, but rarely the one people check on. Because they seem fine, they seem stable, they seem like they have everything under control. And the truth is, they've just learned how to hide the parts that aren't. There's a moment that often comes later in life. It's quiet, subtle, but powerful. It's when they realize they're tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Tired of always being responsible, tired of always being composed, tired of always being the one who holds everything together. And for the first time, they start questioning it. Why do I feel like this? Why is it so hard to relax? Why do I feel guilty when I put myself first? And those questions open something. Because they begin to see, this wasn't just who they are. It was who they had to become. And that realization changes everything. Because if it was learned, it can be unlearned. Slowly, gently. They can begin to reconnect with themselves, to ask what they actually feel, what they actually want, to allow themselves to rest without guilt, to set boundaries without fear, to understand that not every situation depends on them, that not everything will fall apart if they step back. But this process isn't easy, because it requires doing something unfamiliar. Letting go of control, and for someone who built their identity around being in control, that feels terrifying, but it's also where freedom begins. Because real strength isn't about always holding everything together, it's about knowing when you don't have to. And if you see yourself in this, if you were the child who had to grow up faster than you should have, then maybe this isn't just a story, maybe it's recognition, because nothing about you is random. The way you think, the way you react, the way you carry yourself, it all came from somewhere real. And understanding that is the first step towards something changing. So if this made you feel seen in a way you couldn't quite explain before, you might want to stay around, because sometimes the most important thing you can experience is finally understanding yourself.